What was it that made the Netherlands wealthy going back into the 17th century? It was freedom to exchange, freedom to think. They were pioneers of religious toleration. We can all work together in the same community. We don't have to impose my religion on you or yours on me. And we've seen country after country that's gone from terrible poverty and real suffering up to the prosperity that so many of us experience today.
Hello, welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper Show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who knows a lot about liberty and freedom and development. And we're going to talk about all this and much more today. And it's none other than Dr. Tom Palmer. Tom, welcome to the Let People Prosper Show.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, it really is a pleasure to have you on. Been following your work for many years and everything, so I'm excited about our conversation. But before we dive into that, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience. So today's guest is Dr. Tom G. Palmer, one of the leading global voices for liberty and economic freedom. He serves as the Executive Vice President for International Programs at Atlas Network, where he holds the George M. Yeager Chair for Advancing Liberty, and is also a Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute. Over the years, Tom has worked with NGOs in nearly every region of the world to advance freedom, prosperity, and dignity, from Latin America to Eastern Europe to Asia. He's the author of Realizing Freedom, and editor of classics like The Morality of Capitalism and Why Liberty, and most recently co-authored Development with Dignity, Self-Determination, Localization, and the End to Poverty with Matt Warner. With degrees from St. John's College, the Catholic University of America, and Oxford University, Tom has combined academic rigor with real-world impact, demonstrating how free societies and markets can lift people out of poverty. I'm thrilled to welcome him to the show today and have a great conversation about these issues and more. So let me go and ask you the first question I do all the guests, Tom, is why do you do what you do every day?
Yeah, it's a good question that makes me think about my life choices. I can refer them to the life of somebody else that inspired me. A man named Joaquim Nabuco. He was in Brazil. He was a very well-known person, and he campaigned all his life from the age of 18 until success to eliminate slavery in that country. He was an abolitionist. At 18, he started a magazine called the Liberal Tribune. When he was in college, he then became a lawyer, defended runaway slaves, people trying to get their own freedom. And in his book on abolitionism, he said, we should teach ourselves and teach our children in the love for the freedom of other people, because only when you love the freedom of others will you truly appreciate your own. In other words, if you're a free person in a society with slaves, you say, oh, there's a slave. Boy, I'm lucky I'm free. That's cool. It's only when you love that other person's freedom that you'll really appreciate how precious your own is. And I've taken that as a kind of a motto for my life. When I was very young, I read Frederick Bastiat. I got into an economic way of thinking. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Every choice has a cost. It's a really important principle. And so there's no magic in the world. There's cause and effect. And we can ask, as Adam Smith did, why some countries are rich and prosperous and others are desperately poor. And we know the answer by now. It's limited government, it's personal freedom, it's the right to engage in free exchange, free discussion, and to live freely.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well put there. And I wonder kind of with your work now at Atlas Network and doing a lot more kind of globally, and you've been doing this for a while now, but how has that work helped to fulfill your purpose? And what do you love most about it?
I just had a conversation today with colleagues in Burundi. It's a very low-income country. They've suffered a lot in that country. And they are doing serious, concrete things to liberate those people, to create value for themselves and their families, and to lift themselves out of poverty. They're really awesome, inspiring people. They understand the value of free enterprise. And so among their successes in recent years, They made it much easier to start a business. It was a staggeringly expensive process. So people had businesses that were illegal, which means you're under the table, you can't do business openly. That was a success. They had a huge increase in the number of registered businesses and legal employment. One particular guy went from 2 employees to 90.
Wow.
All working above board, honestly, making money for themselves and their families. They changed the rules governing trade. Before, you had to have a passport. You had to go in and out of the country with everything you brought in and out. It's a landlocked country. That meant extremely expensive. You need a new passport every 6 weeks or so because of all the stamps. And it means that the people who do it are victimized because they go at night through the jungle to avoid having to get a passport.
Wow.
And then they're robbed and even gang raped because many of the traders are women. They got rid of that. Now you just need a border crossing card. You go during the day. Huge improvement in the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. They've been working to remove opportunities for corruption. So you can do all land permits and licensing. Everything's done online now, which means no one's asking you for money. These things are incremental improvements in how people can live. It allows people to rise out of poverty into prosperity because of their own efforts, not because they're getting foreign aid or an aid packet, which really just perpetuates that dependency and stops people from lifting themselves out of poverty. So that's just one example. That was one discussion I had today in a conference call. And I get to do that every day all around the world with really awesome people who are taking those positive steps to make life better for themselves and for their communities, but also for the whole world. Because when trade is freed up, all of us benefit from it.
Yeah. Well put. One of your the book that really got me more into your work was Realizing Freedom, and I think that you build on a lot of that through your work there, along with what you're doing now. It's just fantastic to see kind of the liberation of people and the amount of prosperity that's gained from that and the wealth accumulation, and it's transforming lives. I mean, when we think about, the extreme poverty going down substantially by billions of people during free market capitalism and this rise, I think people have pushed that away. I mean, it seems like I just read a poll here recently from Gallup showing that the share of people who believe in capitalism brings about prosperity is now down to one of the lowest in a decade at 54%, according to their survey. But it seems like maybe people are overlooking or maybe ignoring. Well, why do you think that is, that people aren't putting those two together? Is it based on politics or something else?
Well, the first thing is people take their prosperity for granted. It's always been like this, so it always will be. They take for granted that life gets better, but we have too many examples of the market being turned off. Look at Argentina, once one of the richest countries in the world. They went through Peronism, fascism, a kind of militant socialist mentality, a monstrous array of predatory governments, crushing taxation, crushing controls on economic activity, and they ended up spiraling around the drain and became a very poor country. Or Venezuela is another example.
Yeah.
Once the highest per capita income in Latin America, now desperately poor. 8 million people fled that country. So it's not a mystery. Socialism creates poverty. Free markets create prosperity. But if you live in a relatively free society, you think, well, everything's okay, but you don't ask, why is it that way? Yeah. And I'll just give you simple examples about how the United States, when my grandparents were born, was one of the richest countries in the world. Looking at the availability of healthcare, at lifespans, infant mortality, child labor, that country today, if we took a time machine and brought it up to today, would be one of the poorest countries in the world.
Wow.
So from the generation from my grandparents to me, we have transformed such that one of the richest countries in the world would be today considered one of the very poorest. And what made that possible? It was markets. It was trade. It was exchange. It was the right to live your own life, to manage your own life, to start a business, to try something new, to start a new business model or a new kind of gizmo that people could produce, and then transform the world and transform your own life. So think about those businesses that were started in garages. If we'd asked for the government to start the computer industry, we'd still be using abacuses or primitive adding machines. It was people in their garages, Wozniak and Jobs and Bill Gates and people like that, fiddling around and figuring out how to create something that now makes it possible for you and me to speak on different continents in different time zones with fantastic audio and video. All that was made by those people fiddling around in garages. And what made it possible was the freedom to experiment and try.
Yeah. Well put. Again, I think thinking about some of your thoughts there was also how we get to where we're at today. I mean, if you look at Karl Marx, he thought of capitalism, the way his term capitalism, in a negative way, but capitalism was a path to communism because we needed people to have more resources to gain through capitalism, and then we can get to the final state of where he wanted us to be in communism and everything else. And it almost seems like, to your point, is that we in America, some consider us to be so rich that we can afford socialism. We can afford the next step to do something else like universal health care or something along those lines without looking at the real trade-offs that are associated with that. Do you think that kind of comes into play here as well?
Yes. I spent a lot of time in the Soviet Union and the communist countries back in the old days, helping people to rediscover the ideas of liberty. And that meant getting books on economics and law and philosophy and morality translated into Russian, Bulgarian, Polish, Hungarian, and so on. And I'll tell you a joke that I was told in Hungary when it was still communist. There's a meeting of the Communist Party, and the communist intellectual top leader of the party is given a long, long lecture on the nature of communism and Marxism and class struggle and everything else. And one fellow in the back raises his hand. He says, "Comrade, I still don't quite understand. Could you make it more concrete and easier for me?" And the Communist Party official, leader of the propaganda department, lets out a big sigh, says, "Well, let's think of it this way. Socialism is a long and difficult and arduous transitional process entailing great sacrifice, enormous suffering borne by the people, that will bring about a transition from capitalism on the one hand to capitalism on the other hand." In other words, they finally figured out it didn't work.
Yeah.
Or the other thing in Poland and Soviet Union, Lenin had famously said, "You can't make an omelet if you don't break a few eggs." And people said, "Where's the omelet? You broke all the eggs. You killed all those people. Where's the omelet?" There is none.
Wow.
The only thing that will produce prosperity is free market exchange. That's it. And it's not even natural resources. Look at resource-poor places that became rich. The Netherlands was the laboratory of this. They didn't have gold mines or diamond mines or silver mines. They didn't have land. They have to make land out of the ocean. That's why it's called the Netherlands. It's below sea level. They have those dikes. What was it that made the Netherlands wealthy going back into the 17th century? It was freedom to exchange, freedom to think. They were pioneers of religious toleration. You may be Catholic, I'm Protestant, our neighbor down the street is Jewish, but we can all work together in the same community. We don't have to impose my religion on you or yours on me, and we can engage and exchange. That was a laboratory that demonstrated to the world that pluralistic, free societies, one, were possible, and two, could become very wealthy. And then that idea spread around the planet, and we've seen country after country that's gone from terrible poverty and real suffering up to the prosperity that so many of us experience today.
Yeah, yeah. I'm concerned right now about more of this populist direction, across the political spectrum, especially in the U.S. when we have more protectionism, more tariffs, more controls over the voluntary exchanges of trade that has allowed for us to be as prosperous. To your point, Tom, do you see this as a trend happening more globally with your work, or does it seem like it's happening more in the rich areas that we were just talking about, like America, because of the status that we have, and then that's forcing us, or not? That's forcing some people to consider these restraints and controls to get the outcomes they want versus allowing for the marketplace to work.
Well, there's, I think, an outbreak of fundamental irrationality, and I think it's hit the United States in a very big way. And at the root of it is a zero-sum mentality, which is a very predatory way of looking at the world. It's exactly the opposite of how the market works. In the market, I can benefit myself by benefiting you. That's what exchange is about. It's win-win. That's why we have the double thank you. You go to the store, you buy something, the merchant says thank you, and you say thank you. When you think about it, that's weird. Yeah. Both of us say thank you because it's a voluntary exchange. But the zero-sum mentality, which has been very much embraced by the current president, it's his whole way of thinking, is for me to win, you have to lose. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Every gain has a corresponding loss. And so it leads to not only a very predatory view of social interaction. For me to gain, someone has to lose out there. But in addition, it's deeply irrational. Mr. Trump and those who are supporting this move don't understand trade. I'll give you a very simple example. This is not left wing, right wing, up wing, or down wing. It's just financial accounting and economics. When a country has a trade deficit, it doesn't mean they're losing money. This is a fundamental mistake. What it means is foreigners are investing more in that country. So there's an accounting identity, a little technical, but it's not too scary, that savings minus investment equals exports minus imports. It's an accounting identity. It's not an equation of economic growth. What it means is that if your imports are greater than your exports, your investment is greater than your savings, which means foreigners are investing in your country. Mm-hmm. So every time the U.S. has a trade deficit, it means it's because foreigners are investing in the country. So if you say, oh my God, bad news, headline says trade deficit goes up, I can turn that into the same facts into this headline. Great news, foreigners increase investment in our economy. That doesn't sound like a scary thing, but they are equivalent statements. They mean the same thing. So being a magnet for capital isn't a bad thing. It means people view this as a good place to invest, good return, and it means all the people in that country are benefiting because it's raising their wages. So the irrationality, I think, can be addressed. This is a failure of education. No economist, no serious economist supports what is happening right now. In fact, all the ones who do work in the White House.
Yeah.
You cannot find anyone outside who says this is a good idea. And then, unfortunately, a rise of a predatory mentality, which is the exact opposite of how markets work. And that, I think, is a deeper question that requires a bit more thought as to how this has popped up recently. I'll end with this one thought, though.
Sure.
There's been a recycling of ideas from the 1930s, and they're not good ideas. So my parents' generation defeated those ideas, and we thought we were done with them. And they're back. Stephen Bannon, one of the architects of this strategy, said something that was so shocking, going all the way back to 2016. He said, it's going to be great. It's going to be as exciting as the 1930s. My parents did not remember the 1930s as an exciting time. It was a very bad time for freedom and led to horrific wars and conflicts. Let's hope we can repudiate the predatory zero-sum mentality without having to experience what they experienced.
Yeah, I agree. And I worked in the Trump administration and the first administration from June 2019 to May of 2020 and helped write the president's last budget. And I was in the Situation Room during COVID whenever they were trying to figure out what to do with the shutdowns. And I was like, look, this is a bad idea. We don't need to shut anything down. I kept pushing with the senior staff and everything. And I ended up leaving and coming back to Texas where there was some sense of freedom just because I didn't want to continue to go through all that. But I remember my time there, I got to, I don't know if I had the experience of dealing with Peter Navarro, for example, who was a person who was bombastic and would yell at you if you didn't agree and things of that nature. But he wrote this book, Death by China. And his whole viewpoint was that, to your point earlier, of it's not a win-win, it's a win-loss. It's a zero-sum game. If we are losing, they are winning. And I feel like his thought process, which also I think is what Trump's is to a certain extent as well, is an existential crisis in some sense, that we've got to be all out. But it never made sense to me, Tom, because, well, for one, I believe that people should prosper. I don't care if they're Americans or Chinese. I want all people to prosper. And it seems like we try to set one type of people over another. And to me, that just doesn't make any sense. And at the other part of this is, to your point earlier about the economics, trade deficits don't matter. What about the capital account surplus that's being brought in? They pushed back and said, well, yeah, but we don't want to give up investments to other countries. We want it all to be owned here. So I would always make the case of, well, you want us to be poorer then, because that amount of investment isn't coming from America, it's coming from external. And it was just something that's missing there between those. Maybe it is that zero-sum game mentality of not having that, and maybe it's something greater, but I hope that we can get past this level of populism soon, and because these are bad ideas that are setting us up for failure. I wonder, though, with your latest book on development with dignity, it argues that self-determination, local solutions are the keys to ending poverty. How does this approach differ from the traditional top-down development aid, and why do you believe it's more effective in lifting communities?
Oh, that's a deep question, and I'm going to go back to your mention of Karl Marx.
Okay.
The very word capitalism suggests a bad economic theory.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the advocates of markets didn't call it that. That's a term invented by its critics, in particular.
Yes.
Karl Marx and Werner Sombart, who was a Marxist economist who later became a Nazi, unsurprisingly. Mm-hmm. And they thought that what we call this rising prosperity was because of capital accumulation, just to accumulate more capital. But that's not the cause of greater prosperity of a society. It's what makes you or I richer. If I get more capital, I'm wealthier, same for you. But a society grows through innovation, not having more bricks. Getting more horses didn't cause the internal combustion engine or the railroad. It wasn't another horse and then bingo, now you've got railroads. It was innovation. It was people figuring out, hey, we can do this. There's a new way to generate locomotive power. It can be steam. We can use internal combustion and now electricity, electric cars, and so on. Innovation is the key.
Yeah.
So capital, yeah, that's important. Of course, we need capital, but it's innovation that makes capital more productive. What is the necessary ingredient for innovation? It's freedom, the freedom to innovate. And what is required for that as a kind of moral foundation, an underlying basis? It's dignity, it's respect. If you look at the great inventors in England, where a lot of this started, they were nobodies. They weren't members of the nobility. They weren't professors at the university. They were tradespeople. They were people who were tinkered around in their workshop and figured out how to create pumps to lift water so that you could engage in mining more effectively. They figured out how to make incremental improvements to looms so you could produce more cloth with less labor, faster, more efficiently. All those improvements, some of which looked like big jumps, and some of which were lots and lots of little improvements. That's what causes you to rise from poverty to prosperity. It's not just accumulating more capital. Now, economists have known this for some time, but the development industry, if you want to think of it that way, didn't catch on. So going back to someone like Walt Rostow, wrote this very influential book I read when I was an undergraduate called Stages of Growth. What leads you from poverty is an increase in the savings rate, meaning more capital. And poor countries, according to history, don't save enough. So foreign aid will make up the financing gap. They're saving this much, but they need this much. Here comes foreign aid. We add it on top, and then they take off into mass production and mass affluence. It doesn't happen. Foreign aid turned out to have the negative impact. If you look at the charts on foreign aid development, there's a kind of bizarre X shape. As foreign aid went up as a percentage of government's budget and expenditure, economic growth rates went down. It's like an X. It's so clear. And it took a long time for people thinking about development, many of whom have good hearts, right?
Sure.
They really want to help poor people, that delivering capital and aid, that's not what raises prosperity. It's the freedom to trade, the freedom to make something of your life, the freedom to try something new. And that rests on being accorded respect by the government, by your fellow citizens, to say you have the dignity to have a go at it. As the English say, to have a go.
Yeah, yeah. And from that, and I think that's exactly right. And I wonder too, are there certain countries or communities that are doing a better job of this over time, or lessons that we should be learning here in America or across the globe of how to go about that? I mean, one of the things that comes to mind to me is the dignity of work and having jobs and that sort of thing allows us to have that morality too of dealing with other people and those transactions and everything. But are there certain specific examples that you would provide?
Well, I mean, let's look at Germany after World War II or Italy. Those are very interesting examples. Devastated by war, they had been subjected to fascist and National Socialist governments, extreme controls. They had war economies. Everything was going to war. And then, of course, looting the rest of Europe for consumer goods, bread and sausages and butter and cheese being taken from the occupied countries. When that came crashing down, there was very serious suffering in those countries because disrupted crops, so much destruction and devastation. And it was Ludwig Erhard who created called the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle in Germany. He lifted price controls. They began to dismantle all the Nazi economic controls and regulations and allowed people to produce for the market. Same thing happened in Italy. And they had the miracolo economico, the economic miracle, and the sweet life they talked about starting the 50s through the 60s. People could afford a vacation and a motorcycle and a car and have things that people hadn't had before. Remember, Italy had been and Germany earlier, a source of immigration to the U.S. as people fled poverty in those countries. And then after the war, the economies were freed because of good economic ideas. People like Luigi Einaudi, the first president of the Republic, and a whole team of free enterprise economists who had been in opposition. They came in and they created a much freer economy. Same as in Germany. Italy has a bit of a sad story because you move way up to the 1970s and people say, wow, we're a young country. We're rising income. Everything's awesome. Let's create a big welfare state. And now they're suffering with an older population, a lot of sclerotic bureaucracy, and some big problems that are demographic problems that they're facing because they said, well, we can afford this now. And if there are problems, gosh, they won't be for 50 years in the future. Well, that's now.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. It reminds me some of, and not quite exactly, but back in the 1930s that you mentioned earlier, this is when we created Social Security, and then 1965 we have Medicare and Medicaid, and the issues that we have and hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt here in America on future generations that are going to see less growth and less prosperity than they otherwise would.
I think it might actually be even a little bit worse than that in the following way.
Sure.
So that people think about government debt, and that's debt held by the public. So these are our bonds and so on. that say they're IOUs. The government will pay you money for that.
Yeah.
But then there are unfunded liabilities. Those are promises to pay in future. So you have a promise for Medicare when you get to be 65 and beyond that they'll pay for all of these things. But there's no corresponding revenue stream to fund it. That means we're going to approach the date, we are approaching the date, when they won't be able to pay.
Yeah.
But people have made their plans based on these promises, and yet there's no revenue. It's a very serious problem. It's like driving at a cliff, and everyone says, oh, there's a cliff. We're getting closer. There's the cliff. Okay, you need to do something to avoid driving over the cliff. One thing I tell young people when I speak to college or even high school age students is I say, now's the time to begin thinking about your future. Because you're going to pay for the retirement benefits of your grandparents and your parents. Both of them are going to be on your dime. Social Security doesn't have a trust fund. It's all nonsense. It's an accounting fiction. It's a big IOU.
Yeah.
It's drawn out of general tax revenues. All of it. The money that comes in from current Social Security payers is paid out plus money from general revenues. Yeah. So now's the time to start thinking about your future, which means you get that first job. Don't spend 100% of it. Take a percentage and every month put it into stocks. Don't bother with bonds if you're 20 or 25 years old. Put them into stocks, diversified portfolio. As was told to me years ago by a dear friend, he said, Tom, you're not knowledgeable enough and you're not smart enough to be a stock picker.
Yeah.
Buy the whole market and then hold it for a long time. And when you're old, you'll have money.
Yeah.
That's what young people need to be thinking about because these systems are not going to be viable into their own retirement or old age. And they need to start thinking about that now.
Yeah, no, wise advice for sure, and the economic implications are such that it could lead to worse outcomes, of course, in the future if we have to raise taxes substantially. 2032 is the latest numbers from the actuaries of Social Security that says that they can't pay out in full amount. It would be dropped by maybe 25% of their overall benefits, or we have to see massive tax hikes. And so these are big consequences. To your point, that these are massive problems that we have to face here, hopefully sooner rather than later. And I also think, going back to your book on development with dignity and everything, is that this is also reducing the dignity of people. I mean, the more and more that we have as handouts, whether it's Social Security or food stamps or something else, we're replacing the dignity of work and respect for oneself with more of handouts and redistribution mechanisms that don't allow for those individuals to improve their livelihood, improve their lot in life. I've done some work a lot with the Alliance for Opportunity here in the United States with several states, looking at ways that help to bring back that dignity and the agency that people can have over themselves. And it seems like, well, not seems like, but it is a great part of your work that you're doing in globally in other countries, because I think some people would say, well, we just need more foreign aid, to your point earlier. But what that's really doing in many ways is it's crowding out the productive private investments that would happen in that country. And maybe even worse, it enriches those at the top, right? It's along those lines.
It's demonstrably the case.
Okay.
That the bulk of that foreign aid money ends up being siphoned off by the people who know how to manipulate the system.
Yeah.
Why should that surprise us?
Yeah.
Very little of it goes to people who are powerless or helpless. They're the ones who get the crumbs, and it's the people at the top who have political power who get the bulk of it. But now let's think about another angle.
Okay.
I edited a book, which people can find online in a PDF if they want, a little bit of searching, or you can buy it at Amazon and so on, called After the Welfare State. And it looked at these problems of the unfunded liabilities and, quite frankly, a strategy of making people dependent. So Otto von Bismarck, the German Iron Chancellor, in my opinion, a person responsible for many of the ills in the world today, promoted state socialism. Germans were creating their own retirement plans through savings clubs and through banks like what was called Raiffeisenbank, where you could put in your money and invest it, and every month from your wages, you'd put a little bit of money in. You'd see in old German pubs, behind the bar would be all these little boxes. You came in and said, okay, I want a beer, and here's a little bit more money put in the box, and then it would be sent to the bank. Bismarck hated that because it meant that workers were responsible for their own savings. You had what we would call today individually capitalized accounts. It was yours. Instead, he wanted a state system that would be compulsory. You would be taxed. You get no capital from it. Then there's no savings that accrue to you. If you die, your kids get nothing because there's no capital savings. And instead, you just get a little bit of money as a pension from the state, like dripped on your head, drip, 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 drip. And he was very clear, this makes you loyal to the state. That was his reason for doing that. When Social Security was set up in the U.S., there was already a quite established network of friendly societies. Now, people know about them mainly from watching the Flintstones cartoons, because Fred and Barney go to the lodge.
Yeah.
The lodge was the place where you had fellowship with your friends. There were women's lodges also. You could meet your friends, and they helped each other, and typically they ran retirement and healthcare programs. Those have been almost totally displaced by the modern institutions of the American welfare state. So there was a big displacement of these organizations that once were very widespread. More people by far were members of those than were members of labor unions. Labor unions, by the way, also had their own pension and healthcare plans. Those have been displaced by the state, which means each one of us looks between myself and the state rather than looking to associations of which we're members.
Yeah.
And also assets that we say we own those. Those are ours. No one in America can say, I own my Social Security account, because you don't.
No. It's frustrating, right? And it's frustrating given the times that we're in and the lessons that we should have learned. If only they would read your books and your work, Tom, on this area, I think we would be in a much better situation than we are today. What does make you optimistic about the future? I mean, you're doing great work at the Atlas Network, and I mean, I think you work with over 100 countries and different groups across the globe. Are you more optimistic overall, or are you more pessimistic given your work and the things that you see across the country, across the globe?
I would give an answer in three small parts.
Okay.
The first one is, I think that if you want the world to be better, you need to be an optimist. You have a moral obligation to be an optimist. And the reason is pessimism is likely to be self-fulfilling. If you're pessimistic, you're going to fail, and you say, I know it. I can't do anything right. So if you want to be successful, you need to be an optimist. So that's a kind of a moral reason. A realistic optimist. You pay attention to how the world works, what are opportunities for change, and also incremental change. Over time, I've become more aware that it's not just about overnight transformations. Sometimes that happens. Communism did collapse quite rapidly in many countries. But there's also those incremental step-by-step improvements that make life better for people, and doing it by making them more free, reducing the burden of the state, reducing their susceptibility to coercion and violence and predatory behavior, giving them that, or allowing them to realize their dignity. So incremental change is possible, and we see it. And the people I work with are accomplishing it all around the world, including in the United States. So there's not the only country that has problems. I'll give you a simple example.
Yeah.
If you go from 1960 on, the numbers roughly as follows. About 5% of the labor force was in licensed occupations, doctors and lawyers and a few other things like that. Move forward to today, it's it's over 25%. And again, I'd have to go check the numbers again, but these are the ballpark figures. In other words, you can't do the job unless you have a license from the state. And that means all kinds of time and school and licensing fees and so on. To shampoo hair, for example, you need a license. To be a florist, you need a license. If you put a blue flower and a white flower together and sell them without a license, you broke the law. And you can suffer terrible penalties as a consequence. Then almost all of those are limited by state. You're licensed by the Louisiana Florist Association. Only to be a florist in Louisiana. Well, what if you need to move to another state because your spouse got a job there, or you need to go take care of your parents, or whatever it is? Oh, you have to requalify. These are barriers to entry state by state. It's insanity. Mm-hmm. If you're an electrician in one state, you can't be an electrician in another state. The electrons are different there. Electricity works differently. It's totally nuts. It's purely obstructionist to benefit existing practitioners of that art who don't want competition. So a number of Atlas Network partners have pioneered reducing those, getting rid of licensing requirements for florists and shampooers and so on, and then saying, look, if you're a licensed electrician in one state, electricity is the same in the other one. Just show your license in that state, move to this other state, and you're automatically licensed. No $1,500 fee, no 300 hours of additional coursework. You just show them the paper and you can do it there. This was propelled to the consciousness of public officials by the COVID crisis because nurses were restricted from going to one state to another because you're not licensed to be a nurse in that state. Health is different there. Human bodies are different there. Viruses are different there. And it was so crazy that they began bringing about temporary lifting. Why temporary? Make it permanent, man.
Right.
And this is what our partners have been doing. This is one of many things. Another group, the Pacific Legal Foundation, has been doing awesome work in the courts to vindicate your right to engage in economic activity among freely participating partners, people who want to be in an exchange relationship with you, and the right to own your property without arbitrary confiscation. A big victory was the way the governments were engaging in very predatory behavior over property taxes. Let's say you have an elderly person and made a mistake one year and underpaid the tax by $30. It happens, right?
Yeah. Doesn't
notice it. Is a tax-paying person, does everything correctly. They come and seize the house, say, you owe $30. They say, okay, can I pay the $30? No. We're auctioning the house, and we will sell the house for, let's say, $140,000, and we'll keep everything.
Wow. Yeah.
For the $30 tax bill. This theft of your housing assets was so egregious, but it was happening so many places because local greedy officials say, hey, we could take the guy's house for the $30 tax bill, sell it, and then we have enough money to do what we want as government funds here.
Yeah.
And the PLF took that case, they fought, they won. They're still having to make sure that it is enforced around the country at the state level. But there are good people doing really good things for our freedom. I could make a long list of them. I don't want to go down, but these people are heroic because they stand up for the right of people to live with dignity and not to be afraid of their government. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree, Tom. And I think with people like you working in this area, continuing to with the network, the Atlas Network and everyone else, I mean, I think we're in good hands, hopefully, for the future. At least there are good ideas that we know work and that capitalism and free markets are really what provide more dignity and respect than any government program could do or anything else. And I really appreciate you being on the Let People Prosper show. And God bless you and your family. And I look forward to the continued work that you do.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, same here. For the audience, I hope you also enjoyed this discussion, talking about development with dignity, talking about freedom, and the way to allow for more prosperity across the globe isn't through government control. It is through liberty, and it's through individuals and entrepreneurs coming together in voluntary exchange to allow for us to prosper. Thank you for joining me again today. Remember, you can find more information at vanceginn.com or go to my Substack newsletter, vanceginn.substack.com, where I'll put the show notes with links to Tom's work and other things that he's been working on here recently. And until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.